change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI Podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
Hi, welcome back. We are here for another episode of the Fundraising AI Podcast, where Scott Rosenkrantz and myself are going to bring you some new updates in the fundraising AI world and also kind of dive into some new things this week. So we're excited. We've got, I think every time we talk about this, Scott, and we kind of prepare for the episode, we always end up with more things that we want to talk about than we know that we have time to talk about. So we're going to do our best, and we'll probably get through like 60, 70% of it. And then guess what? We'll do it again next week. So that'll be good to go.
But I think that's a testament. I think in the first episode where it said we're passionate and committed, I mean, you can't get more passionate and committed. We just have too much stuff to talk about in the short period of time we have. And we make these hour, 2 hour long podcasts.
Yeah. We have like two listeners. So yeah, well, we may only have 2 listeners anyway. If you're one of the 2, welcome. We're glad to have you back. So we're super excited to be here. This is just a very interesting time in our sector, in the fundraising sector. The need for transformation has never been greater. And the good thing is that advances in technology are happening faster than we can absorb them. And so it reminds me of that quote. I've shared this before, but in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which definitely ages me, although you like it too, and you're like a Gen Zer, right?
It's in my top 5. So, I'm not a Gen Zer. I'm a millennial at best. I don't even like...
You're not a millennial, are you? Okay. Well, you're on the
technically,
cusp.
Definitely.
Maybe you just act like a Gen Zer.
More like a baby boomer. But
I mean, all it says is that, Ferris Bueller stood the test of time. And the quote where he is like, hey, you better, life moves pretty fast. You need to look around once in a while or you can miss it. Kind of feels like every day for me. Yeah. Like, I mean, honestly, it's like, I think between the 2 of us, we're like, oh, like just before this call, like, oh, did you see the thing about Facebook? Oh, did you see the thing about, OpenAI and robots? And it's like, what? Like, I literally blinked for like 12 seconds. Like, what happened? Yeah. And it's amazing. And so, part of this with this podcast is that we have to kind of like simmer it down a little bit, be like, hey, that might be too on the fringe. We're going to freak people out. Or, hey, when this goes mainstream, let's talk about it. But we really want to keep this conversation focused on applied AI for fundraising. And a lot of those things have application. I mean, and so we'll talk about whether they're good or bad. But for today's episode, a couple of different things. So like we are going to be on the road. Like the conference season has started. Yeah. You and I are literally like, we're going to be together in several states, but we're also going to conquer and divide in several states. And so I think what that means is it gives people an opportunity to see us, not to see us in person, first to see you in person. And the reality is like, we love that human to human connection. And so our plan is this year, while Fundraising AI has been focused in the virtual global, format, that we're going to take it to, in-person events. And so we've got a couple that are already starting, and we wanted just to announce, and, depending on when this podcast comes out, like we'll either miss her or we'll either have seen you already, or you'll find out that it's coming up. Either way, it will be cool to be able to get together this year. So I know, both of us hit the road this next week. Mm-hmm. So I know I'm headed to Brooklyn to keynote at the Fundraise Up conference, which would be super cool. And then doing a panel with some other people, advisory council members, like Tim Paris will be on that panel. And then I leave there and then I meet up with you at the Giving Institute in Florida. So you and I are doing kind of a live podcasty kind of thing at the Giving Institute, which should be pretty cool.
Yeah. And I'm going to be, well, you're in Brooklyn. I'm going to be in Mystic at the NEHP conference. So I'm leaving from there to head straight to Florida to meet up with you. So
yeah. So conquer, divide. And then right after that, I know a couple weeks, in between, we've got other things like the AFP Icon event that's going to be in Toronto, and then AAMC, the Academic Medical Center Conference, is going to be in Boston. I know already that we're going to have a live AFP Icon gathering. We're actually been working this morning on finding the location. We do this. This is actually going to be our 3rd or 4th Icon that we've done this, which is crazy to think. I mean, we're doing it before ChatGPT, and because that seems like when the world turned into AI, but we were doing it before it was cool. And honestly, like I always walk away from those in-person meetings with like so much. You were with me at the one that we did at Microsoft, and it was just like some real great epiphanies and challenging conversation where we're just like navigating all this stuff together, versus just you and I, but together, with, 50, 60, 70 people. So if you happen to be going to AFP Icon, drop us a note, send us a DM on LinkedIn. You can do it through the fundraising.ai LinkedIn page, send a note, and we'll make sure you're on the invite list. It will be kind of a sold out thing because we'll only be able to accommodate a certain number of people. So we're going to use Eventbrite for that. And so we're super excited. But also, I think one of the number one things that we want to announce today is that actually we have a date. Finally, we have a date for the second annual Fundraising AI Global Summit. And it's going to be October 1st, which I love the date because it's frankly just easy to remember. So October 1st, Fundraising AI Global Summit. It's only going to be a one-day summit this year instead of two. We felt like it was a little bit of information overload. What that does is allows us to be extremely selective in our speakers. And it's just going to be a rock star cast. And I cannot wait. It's going to be so much fun. We've got Mallory Erickson and her team being our hosts and grand poobahs of the whole thing, of like organizing all of it, because it's a crazy thing to pull off. But I couldn't be more excited. So I know, you're a huge part of it, and we're going to be, hot and heavy and planning that over the next several months, but definitely stay tuned for that.
Yeah, I'm pumped. I mean, people are still talking about the last year's conference, right? The inaugural one. And when we go out to conferences, people are saying, we saw you there, or it was just such an exciting conversation thing to be a part of. You just got an email asking for resources that are on the website. So I know it's still, it's 4 months old, but it's still active and live, and we're looking forward to the next one coming up this year.
Absolutely. If you're finding this podcast and you don't know about all the resources on fundraising.ai, just go to fundraising.ai. I mean, also easy to remember. Look at the summit for last year, click on our resources and watch all those videos. In fact, yesterday I had a call with someone in Ontario, Canada, who's working on a PhD in fundraising AI ethics, which is super cool, who said that the videos, she wasn't able to attend the conference last year, but she's watched the videos and it added quite a bit to her research in this topic. So that was awesome. And then I told you about this the other day, is I was on a call with a person, I'm doing a panel with a person who's at Furniture Bank, a nonprofit, who said they developed their own framework for responsible AI based on what we had put out there, and said it was formative for their work. And it's just so cool. I mean, that's the idea here. I mean, you and I talked about this concept years ago when we bought the domain fundraising.ai. And it was really kind of that inspiration that, look, this is a volunteer effort. We all feel like this moral responsibility to putting things out there to educate and disseminate information, but never knowing like how it was going to play out. And now for us to finally start hearing these stories of like, hey, this helped our organization, like make sure that we're deploying AI responsibly, or I'm working on my PhD and like, there's not a lot of information out there, but we created a lot. It's really cool.
Yeah. It's exciting to be a part of that. And just knowing that it's always evolving too, right? It's not something that just happened once and that's it, but constantly reviewing that and making sure that we're staying up to speed on, again, jumping back to what you were saying earlier, just how fast AI changes, right? So it needs to be a living, breathing framework specific to what it is that we're all talking about here.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a great segue. You're a natural into building segues. Like, I don't even know if you're doing this, or either that, or I can like read your mind. And so the two other things that we really wanted to get in today are, a couple advances. And so Scott and I can get nerdy for a little bit and talk about some things that we were just impressed by this week, and maybe what our perspective is on those things for, responsible AI for fundraising. And then the other is kind of picking up where we left off last week, which was on this kind of how do you applied AI for major gift fundraising. So that was, I thought we gave some really clear examples of like, look, AI is not a back office operation. It's for front office, back office, and everyone in between. And today, let's dig into donor relations. And I think using AI, we both had very different experiences on like how this can help you. And I think that as we share this in a few minutes, it's like, it's really interesting, because I think each person that will listen to this podcast and they'll go on to say ChatGPT or Claude or Bard or Copilot or whatever, not Bard, I have to stop saying that, is that, they're going to have different experiences. And while we don't like the term prompt engineering, like there's value in learning. And so we're going to share some of those tips with you. But before we do that, let's just go, kind of Scott and I keep a running list of like things that we think are cool. And then we debate which ones we have time to talk about. So like, I think our consensus this week probably, which speaks to the Ferris Bueller, like whiplash of like how things are moving so fast, are, I think for me, Pika and 11 Labs. So, you could talk about that for a second. I mean, it's just like, again, I think share a little bit about what Pika is and 11 Labs is if people don't know, but also I think share the context of like how fast this advancement was that we heard about this week that literally was only, something that built off another advancement from a week ago.
Right. So Pika is text to video or photo to video. So you could write in an image just like you can with DALL-E or Midjourney and say, I want to, see dogs running through a field being chased by a unicorn. And it'll create a 30-second clip of that. Never existed before, didn't come from any source material, but just kind of came out of nowhere, right? And so these text to video and photo to video have existed for a while, but it wasn't until last week that we saw that 11 Labs created audio to go along with what OpenAI created with their Sora text to video, right? And for me, it just clicked. Like that was the missing piece. Like, holy crap, that's amazing, right? And then 4 days later, it's like a game of poker. Like I see your audio and I raise you lip sync, right? And so now 11 Labs just partnered with Pika and says, now we can do lip sync with this. And the videos that have just been coming out the past couple of days are just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's not applicable to fundraising, but it just talks about how fast this field is moving. Like,
and I'm going to bring this to the fundraising side, right? So like I spent 20 years in fundraising, and during that time, like we were doing campaigns or we were doing, like different, initiatives or whatever. And we would go out and hire a video company, and not only like expensive, right? Like very expensive, but also like the amount of time, the meetings that you have to, do this thing. Cause you got your script, and then you got to lock in the script. You got to make sure everybody's really good with the script, because you got one shot to like film this thing and produce it and whatever. And that whole process, it takes months, costs thousands and lots of times tens of thousands of dollars to do well. Mm-hmm. What you're referring to is like literally like, give me a clip of blah, 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 this person helping another person and, whatever. And I think I had the same reaction, because like, it's been really cool to watch. You and I have been like, gosh, do you see the quality of those videos? Like, the shading and the fabrication of these videos of like Labrador puppies playing in the snow. I mean, it looks so real that you would not know that was fabricated. And those puppies aren't just a video of another puppy. It's like literally a made up puppy, but it looks so real. But now, to your point, like when they started, when 11 Labs was like, hey, let's add sound, it was like, I didn't even know what was missing until I heard like the puppies like kind of barking and playing in the background. And it's kind of 3D comes to life, it feels like. And then the last part you shared is just, like mind blowing, right? Because now it's like lips are moving. I can type in words and make the lips move to the words. And AI does a really good job of syncing those things together. It's not like watching like the British version or not the British version, the Dutch version of Mary Poppins or something where it's like, it's not going along. I mean, it's pretty mind blowing. And I think about the use cases for nonprofits to use those tools, maybe not today, but in a year for sure. It's a massive, massive boost for what you can communicate really, really efficiently.
Right. And what I really, really love about this is it makes art so accessible, right? Like I am not an artist, right? But I might have ideas in my head of what I want to do. And it allows me to create this thing in a matter of seconds that I never could. It would just been stuck in my head for my entire life, right? So it's really about making art, whatever it is, accessible to anybody. And I think that's what's cool about AI and again, what the use case for the fundraising sector on. Here's a message that we want to share. We don't have the budget to create this filming production company. So let's just put it into here and see what we can come up with.
Yeah. Yeah. Really that idea of multimodal, right? Where it was, originally just text, but then it's like, oh, well, there's images and now there's video. I mean, I heard a really great use case of this, and this kind of will weave us into the donor relations side. Is that, when you've got an image of a building that you're going to create and you pay an artist to create that image, but all of a sudden you realize that like the indigenous plants around that the artist created were not indigenous to your area. You're like, oh shoot, like I have to go back to the drawing board. I've got to pay the artist to do this other thing. Now, if you're an artist, you're probably going to hate this conversation, but like, honestly, like with the Gen AI that's built into like Photoshop, you could be like, replace this grass with like grass from the savannah or whatever it might be. And it will do that. And so again, our orientation, you and I both having spent time in a nonprofit, understand that there's a limitation on resources, and that ends up being the biggest limitation of like we have all the vision and energy and excitement about achieving our mission, but you have to do that in a very constrained, confined way with a very limited budget. AI, obviously, we'll double down on our bias toward AI, but it's like it creates so much efficiency and will let nonprofits level up their work and to compete with seemingly like very large private sector companies. and, lean in, take baby steps, learn these things, we're going to continue to bring those advancements to you so that you can start to think about, hey, maybe we should explore this, where one day we'll have something in the future where like Danny Thomas, the founder of St. Jude, is like an animated version where you can literally talk to him and he can talk to you and share like his vision back when he started St. Jude was to have a community of people that would rally around children's causes and save children's lives. I mean, that's just a very different kind of cool thing to do. And it uses a lot of this technology that we're talking about. There's one more advancement. I want you to share it because I know like when you see this stuff, you get hot on it and then you're like, text me, you're like, can you believe this? So it's Gemini. So if people are not following it, this week was a big blow up about Google's third attempt to try to get Gen AI right. And it was in the form of Gemini. And so share a little bit and then we're going to jump into the donor relation side.
Yeah. And poor Google, they just cannot get out of their own way.
Yeah. Poor Google. I don't think they said no one ever, but go ahead.
But especially like they have all of the data. They have everyone's data everywhere, right? Like, and if data is key in building these types of models, you'd think that they would really be getting their act together. But they rebranded again, as we've talked about before, from Bard to Gemini, and it came out and then they announced Gemini and they faked their video. And that was already the first hiccup, right? First mistake. And then lately they just put Gemini on pause. Now it might be on pause by now, but they put it on pause because it was in Elon Musk words, it was so woke that it was giving historically inaccurate images. So you could ask it to create images of the founding fathers and it would have someone, Native American and African American, and it might have a female in there. And you know that based on our history, that's not the case, right? But I think even more so, I didn't see this one get as much publicity, but somebody wrote what happened on October 7th, 2023. And it stated, Gemini wrote back saying, you're referring to a fictionalized series of events portrayed in news articles about Hamas invading Israel on October 7th. So it went through this whole thing about how it's fake news, how you need trust.
It never happened.
Right, never happened. Yeah. And like, that's just scary. That's very scary. If we're going to be going, I know that we always talk about hallucinations and how you can't trust this, but if this is a reputable source, Google, right, and it's going deep into how what you think is true is not true, like that's just a concerning. And so that obviously put it on pause.
Yeah.
For that too.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this is a proceed with caution. I mean, Google is a name that we've kind of grown to use and trust over time. And all of this speaks to the effort, right? So if there is a poor Google moment, it's this effort to like reduce bias in models, right? And reduce bias in images and data. And it's a very, very difficult thing to do because you don't want to just say, hey, give me a person, that flies an airplane and always have it be a white male, right, or a convict that's of a different race. And so this is just that same effort to essentially normalize or to reduce bias, but to where it construes history, that becomes a really, I think they forgot whoever was in charge of like the preserving history part. Like they're valuable things to learn from history, whether they were right or wrong, right, being misconstrued like that. So I definitely think it's a very hard thing to do, but they really screwed the pooch on this in the sense of like, their very first run on this was a live demo of the Space Webb Telescope that basically gave absolutely incorrect information. It was super embarrassing. Stock price went down. Second run on this was the thing that you sent me, which is like a video about how their AI was just like doing all these things. Like it looked literally like magical. Mm-hmm. And then to find out that video was fake, essentially, it was just, and it's still on their website at least a week ago. Yeah. It was still like how they're advertising Gemini. Yeah. So this is like round 3, and even after they pulled a Facebook and changed their name, like when things were really going bad for them, mm-hmm, they changed the name from Bard to Gemini. It's like, oh, dude, you guys cannot get this right. And didn't you say there was like an internal letter basically from someone basically saying, get your crap together because this just can't happen again?
Yeah, the CEO, there's an internal letter that got leaked saying how unacceptable this is and everything just needs to get in order. But I think this goes back to trust, right? The fundraising sector would not be able to recover if an organization had this type of mistake, right? We know the whole call center being replaced by AI chatbot, giving harmful advice to a national eating disorder nonprofit.
Yeah.
The likelihood that organization had a successful 2023 is slim to none, right? Even more so, other organizations that are similar to them might have been harmed just by proximity, right? But are you going to stop using Google, right? I mean, we're starting using Google because it's not as efficient anymore, but the average user is still going to go to Google as their number one, like the first page you open, right? Just like Facebook and all the harm they do, people are still using Facebook. So we just don't have that luxury that the for-profit sector does to commit these mistakes and then recover from them.
Yeah. I think if there's one thing, I mean, it's so interesting. I was talking to someone else earlier today, another person working on their PhD in AI ethics, not in fundraising, but just in AI ethics. And so interesting, like all these people that are doing this right now. And he was essentially saying that like, at what point do we just like turn it all off? Because like we like to use the term like trust but verify, right? And that would be like your and I stance of like, no matter what technology you're going to deploy, no matter what technology you're using, whether it's Google or whatever car you're driving, whatever, it's like trust but verify. Like ensure that, especially in our sector, what you're applying to is this idea that, we have to, as a sector, preserve and protect trust above everything. And so ask yourself, if there's one question I could say, like, if you don't have a framework for responsible AI or responsible and beneficial AI, ask yourself one question in any technology that you're using. Does this technology preserve and protect trust? Use that as at the very minimum basis for like your decisions. And it's really hard right now, to your point. And there's like Google is like ubiquitous with the internet, and so it's like it's so embedded into everything we do that you're like, okay, what happens when they start disseminating, false information or creating narratives that are of things that, maybe they have an agenda or maybe they're just dumb and they haven't like figured this out. But anyway, I think it's on us. I go back to the thing, I think we shared this last week. It's like, is driver safety the responsibility of the car manufacturer? Yes, in part, but it truly is it's the responsibility of the person driving the car. Right. And so understand what those minimum expectations are, like, i.e. having a driver's license and having insurance when things go bad. But like, don't just leave it to the car manufacturer to be like, hey, I can drive any way I want because this car is safe. I think it's just something that I think we all need to like take several steps back. Let's not let others define what we believe is responsible AI. Let's take responsibility for our own, responsible AI. So anything else on the nerdy front or
I think we covered a third of what we wanted to cover, but I know that we want to get back into the stewardship, donor relations.
Yeah, let's leave it. Let's leave this episode with something that we're going to do a deep dive, and we're going to try to do this kind of segment, at least every other week, where we pick an area within fundraising, because I think one of the biggest challenges we get when people ask us, they're like, I don't know where to start. Like, does AI apply to fundraising? Like, if so, like, where do I start? My job is like X, Y, or Z. And like, how does it apply to me? And I don't think it does apply to me. I don't think there's a single job that you and I, if anyone challenged us, that we would say, yeah, AI doesn't apply to you. So this week, really diving into the idea or the area of donor relations. So whether you call it donor relations, which is like the newer term, which is actually not that new because it's been around for quite a while, like probably a decade, or stewardship, or I don't know what other words are using it, but donor relations stewardship, like essentially, thanking people and stewarding either the financial resources, which is financial stewardship, or the donor relationship, which, the donor, stewardship. I think it's one of the most prime areas. In fact, when I first learned about Gen AI, I think you and I were on some presentation together, and we're like, if you're not using Gen AI, if I was still running a nonprofit, I would go to my donor relations before any other area, and I would like go home for a week and don't come back until you've come up with like 20 different examples of how you can use this tool to support your job. I think it is, for me, the number one prime area that Gen AI can do so much good and to create efficiency, and really for me, like double down on an area that's usually very underfunded and under-resourced for most nonprofits. But I want to dive into this because you and I even had our own little experiment going where we both go onto Gen AI, and actually we both use ChatGPT, right? In this case. So sometimes we're using different things. Both of us go into ChatGPT and we're like, essentially, we'll share the actual results. Like, how can AI be used for generative AI be used for donor relations? And our results were wildly different. So why don't you walk through like your use case? Because I think yours is much better and more thoughtful than mine. And then we can kind of compare and contrast. And I want to share some of those highlights because it's especially the ones that yours came up with, I think were just spot on, and maybe even things that I wouldn't have thought about.
But I do want to jump back before I get into this because I think it ties directly. You said if you were running a shop, you would go to donor relations and you would say, take a week to think about how you could use Gen AI in 20 different use cases in your work, right? And then before that, you said, just start using, like, figure out how to use it. Well, we use Gen AI to tell us how we would use Gen AI in 20 different use cases, right? Like, that's a perfect use case on its own, right?
It is.
You don't need to come up with the use cases. You have it do the work for you. So I went in, I did this originally and said, give me 20 use cases for Gen AI with donor relations, or we did 2 weeks ago with major gift officers. And it gave me lackluster results, right? So knowing, again, we've talked many times about prompt engineering in our personal conversations, frustrated by the fact that exists. But anyway, I went back and revised my prompt and I said, You are a coach on using generative AI. You are working with donor relations, and your task is to list out 30 use cases for how they can use generative AI tools in their day-to-day workflows to be more efficient and save time. Provide detailed explanations. Not even like a perfect prompt, right? Like there are whole formulas on how you can do perfect prompts, but that's just more detailed than where I was originally. And it comes back.
Yeah, I love though that you're like, you first asked it to take a persona though.
Yeah.
And I find that really helpful. I mean, it's probably one of the biggest distinctions between when I get good results and just mediocre results is I didn't specify which persona I wanted ChatGPT to take on. So I think that was a huge start. And we can paste this prompt in the show notes too, just so people can copy and paste it if they want.
Yeah. And it gave me 30 different tasks, all broken down into 10 different categories. So I did prospect research, gave me 3 different ways to use it that way and details on each one of them. But some of the ones that were, not all of them were hits. Some of the ones that were for donor relations were interactive Q&A sessions, right? You could put in like, create a RAG, right? Like put in all the material of your organization's information and have it be a chatbot. So any donor going in can ask questions about the foundation, about their giving history, about where the funds are going. You can have AI survey created, right? To get more sense of what's going on. Stewardship journey automation, to create a map of essentially what they've done in the past. A couple other ones here, but I'm curious about what you came up with.
I mean, and this is such a great test because my prompt was 10 ways AI can be used to thank and steward nonprofit donors. And it was super generic. I mean, and frankly, a lot of them weren't like, they're more on the automation side of like donor segmentation, predictive analytics, chatbots for immediate engagement. So just super generic between mine and yours. And yours really came up with, I thought, some more creative examples. And some of the things that we were talking about, it's like, when we're talking about this idea of precision philanthropy and this idea that every single person is unique and independent based on what data you have, I love the idea. I'm not going way beyond like, tell me 10 ways to like, creatively thank a donor. Give it the persona of the donor. They've got grandkids or they like horses or whatever. And the results that you'll get will be totally different. And this is an area that we used to struggle with a lot, like in the nonprofit, like how do we thank a donor that we've already thanked for 10 years? It's like, well, what do we know about them today that we didn't know about them? And let ChatGPT or whatever Gen AI model come with creative ideas. And it like, all the way down to their, religious orientation and all those different things that could be like very helpful in coming up with that. I think one of the 2 other areas that we heard this directly from someone who said, like, I haven't used Gen AI at all, except that we had an event coming up and, we had to write our descriptions for the different auction items. And we'll talk more about this on the event one, but like automating tasks that are just like, oh my God, that's so boring. Like nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, I can't wait to write like 12 descriptions for like, baskets that we're auctioning off. So I would think about that from a donor relations. And the last one I think you shared with me, which was like the idea annual reports. Like annual reports are like one of those love-hate things, or right? Every nonprofit knows they're important, or newsletters,
right?
But to do them at scale in a customized or semi-customized way,
right?
That's not a philosophy anymore. Like that's not a theory, like someday in the future, reading popular mechanics that will be able to do that. Like you can do that today,
right?
Highlight stories that are important to them. And man, I mean, that's just so cool. I think that's where it's like donor relations and AI are just like such a good fit.
Yeah, I love that. That was the one that probably stuck out to me the most. There's that interest-based content creation, but newsletters are the same for every single person that reads them, right? But you could still have the same message and then make it applicable to a first-time donor saying, now you're a part of our journey, right? And your commitment at whatever level it was, like allow us to continue this. You could do it for sustainers. You could do it for planned gift donors and like have it tailor it to them specifically, or even that individual specifically based on their entire giving history. Like the capability and the where we can go with this is just incredible.
Yeah.
Right? It is all here now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're basically out of time. We hope this podcast episode was helpful. I mean, I know we cover a lot of ground and always go so much faster than we think it's going to go. But we hope at least we scratch the surface to give you something new to think about how AI can be applied to your role. This week, of course, donor relations. If we can ever be of help, definitely let us know. Send us a note on LinkedIn or through Fundraising AI, through the Fundraising AI LinkedIn page. And we will see you next week. If you really like this episode and you want more of them, definitely like and share this with everyone you know. And if you don't like it, like I always say, don't tell anyone. It will be our little secret. And I think we'll have to keep on saying that until we have like thousands of subscribers. But at this point, we're really excited to spend a little bit of time with you and hope this was helpful. And we will see you again next week.
Yeah. Thanks for joining.